The auctioneer called her unsuitable for labor or companionship, just another broken specimen on Taros 9, where death is merely an inconvenience to be eliminated. But when Kel Renair signed the transfer file, he wasn't buying a slave. He was accepting a moral obligation that would redefine both their lives. The air on Taros 9 tastes of rust and ozone. Neon signs flicker arrhythmically down cramped corridors, their failing lights reflecting in the perpetual dampness of the streets. Every surface bears the patina of neglect: scuffed metal, cracked viewports, humidity beating on cold surfaces. Life support systems groan in the background, a constant reminder of the moon's slow decay. This is a mining colony where oxygen costs credits and people cost less. The corporate machinery measures everything in resource allocation. A damaged worker gets evaluated against repair costs versus replacement value. Death isn't a tragedy here. It's an accounting entry, a logistical problem to be solved with cold efficiency. They don't mourn the lost. They recalibrate the production quotas. The inhabitants move through these corridors with a particular gait, shoulders hunched against the low ceilings, eyes fixed ahead to avoid unwanted contact. Some are trapped by debt bondage, others by the simple lack of anywhere else to go. They carry the unspoken guilt of survival, of making choices they can't unmake to see another cycle. Compassion becomes a luxury item here, something you ration carefully because it always costs you something. Kel Renair moves through this world like all the others. He keeps his head down, his hands in his pockets, his past a weight he carries in the set of his shoulders. He's made decisions he can't undo, taken paths that led nowhere good. The moon watches him like it watches everyone, a silent, indifferent witness to the slow erosion of hope. It sees the extraction of everything valuable from the land and the people, leaving only hollowed-out shells behind. He notices things others miss, the slight tremble in a new worker's hands, the way a veteran miner favors his right side, the particular dullness in the eyes of those who've stopped counting days. These observations cost him nothing but attention, a currency he still possesses in small quantities. He understands the economy of this place because he's lived by its rules for too long. The decision to attend the auction isn't conscious planning. It's the accumulation of too many cycles in this place, too many faces that disappeared from the mess hall, too many silent calculations about what a life is worth. He stands at the back of the crowded chamber, his presence just one more shadow in the dim light. What drives a man like Kel to spend his last credits on someone labeled worthless? What debt does he carry that makes this transaction necessary? The answer isn't in the flickering auction notice board or the jaded faces around him. It's in the quiet space between heartbeats, in the memory of choices he couldn't make before. Then, the auction begins. The auctioneer pushes forward the final lot. The other specimens stood in orderly rows, but this one occupies space differently. She doesn't fidget or shrink back. Her stillness feels deliberate, like a choice rather than submission. The low light catches her hair, breaking into faint spectral patterns that shift as she breathes. Her hair isn't human. It absorbs the chamber's dim illumination and throws back fractured colors. Violet strands catch what little light exists and turn it into something else. The auction handler shoves her forward with a gloved hand. Her skin registers the contact with a subtle shift in its faint luminescence. Cerulean tones deepen where pressure was applied, then slowly return to their soft glow. The auctioneer drones the specifications. Ethereum variant, Category 7. He mentions failed labor tests, poor stress tolerance, unsuitable for companion work. The handlers chuckle among themselves. One gestures at her collar. The neural inhibitor pulses with a steady blue rhythm against her throat. It looks clinical and cruel, a piece of hardware grafted onto living tissue. Kel watches the way she holds herself. The auctioneer sees a broken product, but Kel sees containment. The collar isn't just restraining her, it's suppressing something. Her file shows resonance sensitivity readings that don't match any known worker profile. They're off the scale into theoretical ranges. The slavers missed what they were looking at because they were testing for the wrong things. The label on her profile reads, Sanctuary Hybrid from the Meridian Expanse. That designation means nothing to the bidders. They want muscle or technical skill or pleasant company. This being offers none of those things. Her value exists in a different category entirely, one the auction house doesn't have a price list for. Bidders shake their heads. Some make jokes about wasted oxygen. The auctioneer drops the price again, but no one signals interest. She represents a net loss, a drain on resources with no return. They see a faulty machine, not a living being. The struggle isn't about her price anymore. It's about whether she has any right to exist in their economy. Kel's assessment shifts. He stops evaluating her as an asset and starts seeing the person behind the specifications. The collar's pulse matches her breathing rhythm, a constant reminder of what's being held back. Her eyes track movement in the room without fear, just quiet observation. She's studying them as much as they're studying her. The auctioneer declares the lot unsold. He motions for handlers to remove her. That's when Kel sees it, the slightest tension in her shoulders. Not fear of punishment, but resignation, the acceptance of yet another rejection. Her luminescent markings dim slightly, as if responding to the final verdict. Kel's decision forms without conscious thought. It isn't about saving anyone or making amends. It's about recognizing something the others missed entirely. He watches the handlers begin to lead her away, her head bowed just enough to conceal her face. Instead, he steps forward. The transfer document feels cold under Kel's fingers. The plas paper surface resists the stylus slightly, requiring firm pressure to leave a mark. He reads the designation one more time. Unclaimed specimen deemed unsuitable for labor or companionship. The words sit there in official script, a permanent judgment encoded in administrative language. He signs without flourish or hesitation, just the quick motion of someone completing necessary paperwork. The transaction registers immediately in the central database, a life now tied to his identification code. Around them, the crowd doesn't disperse. They watch the transaction with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. A miner with scarred knuckles shakes his head, muttering about wasted credits. Another makes a comment about how the broken ones never recover, how they drain resources until there's nothing left. Their voices carry in the chamber, bouncing off metal walls. They speak the common language of Taros 9, where value gets measured in output and obedience. Kel feels the weight of the transfer chip in his hand. It contains her entire existence now. Medical readings, behavioral assessments, the slaver's notes on failed training attempts. The chip feels heavier than its physical mass. He slides it into his pocket without looking at the crowd. Their opinions don't matter, but their words echo something deeper about this place. They reveal the cold arithmetic that governs every interaction here. The constant calculation of whether something or someone is worth the oxygen they consume. His internal conflict sharpens as he completes the transaction. This isn't about heroism or redemption. It's simpler and more complicated than that. He knows what it costs to keep someone alive here. The daily struggle for resources, the constant pressure of survival. Taking responsibility for another being goes against every instinct of self-preservation he's developed over cycles. But something in him has shifted, a need for meaning that goes beyond mere survival. The auctioneer hands him the physical restraint lead, a thin metal chain that connects to her collar. Kel takes it without meeting the man's eyes. The chain feels wrong in his hand, a symbol of ownership that doesn't fit what he's actually doing. He doesn't pull or guide her. He simply holds the end while she follows, her steps quiet on the metal floor. Her luminescent markings pulse softly in rhythm with the collar's blue light. They move through the crowd, which parts reluctantly. Kel keeps his gaze forward, avoiding the stares. He feels the transfer chip in his pocket like a live charge. The central registry now shows him as responsible for her survival, her safety, her very existence. It's a burden he hasn't carried for anyone but himself in a long time. The weight feels familiar and foreign all at once. What makes a man spend his last credits on someone labeled worthless? It isn't charity or nobility. It's the recognition of a different kind of value, one that doesn't appear on any balance sheet. It's the understanding that some things can't be measured in output or obedience. Kel doesn't look back at the auction house as they leave. He simply moves forward into the dim corridor, one hand holding the restraint lead loosely, the other already planning how to allocate his diminished resources for two instead of one. Finally, she is carried out. The shelter door seals behind them, cutting off the corridor's chill. Kel's quarters feel different with another presence in them. The space seems smaller, the air thicker. He removes his worn coat and drapes it over her shoulders. The garment hangs loose on her frame, but she pulls it tighter instinctively. The fabric smells of mineral dust and recycled air, but it holds residual warmth from his body. She stands motionless near the entrance, her eyes taking in the sparse surroundings. The shelter functions on minimal systems, a single heating unit, a food synthesizer, a cot pushed against the wall. Everything serves a purpose, nothing exists for comfort. Kel watches her for a moment, assessing her condition the way he would check equipment after a hard mission. Her breathing remains shallow, her movements hesitant. He activates the food synthesizer. The machine hums softly as it prepares a basic nutrient solution. The liquid emerges pale and translucent in a metal cup. He carries it to her slowly, giving her time to register his approach. She watches the cup without reaching for it, her hands remaining at her sides. Her luminescent markings pulse softly under the coat, faint blue patterns visible at her wrists. Kel holds the cup steady. After a long moment, she brings her hands up slowly. Her fingers tremble slightly as they close around the metal. She brings the cup to her lips and drinks too quickly, the liquid catching in her throat. She coughs, the sound dry and rasping. Kel keeps his hand near the cup, steadying it without taking control. She drinks again, more slowly this time, her eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. As the warm liquid settles, something shifts in her posture. The rigid tension in her shoulders eases slightly. She takes a deeper breath, the first full inhalation since they entered the shelter. A single tear forms at the corner of her eye, tracking slowly down her cheek. It doesn't fall but crystallizes there, a tiny frozen diamond against her skin. The neural inhibitor at her throat continues its rhythm, but the blue pulse grows fainter. The light dims almost imperceptibly with each cycle. Her own luminescent markings respond differently now. Where before they had pulsed with the collar's rhythm, they now glow with a soft, steady light. The patterns shift subtly, reacting to the shelter's warmth, to the nutrient solution, to the simple fact of being sheltered rather than exposed. This isn't a transaction anymore. The act of sharing warmth, of providing basic nourishment, transforms the space between them. Kel doesn't speak, doesn't offer reassurance or explanation. He simply maintains a quiet presence, allowing her to experience safety without demands or expectations. The ritual of care becomes its own language, one that doesn't require translation. Her breathing deepens further. The crystallized tear remains on her cheek, a physical marker of some internal thawing. She holds the empty cup with both hands now, her grip firm rather than tentative. The neural inhibitor's pulse has faded to a faint flicker, barely visible against her skin. Her own natural luminescence brightens in response, the cerulean patterns gaining depth and complexity. What happens when someone experiences basic kindness after knowing only utility? The change isn't dramatic, not some sudden transformation. It's in the slight relaxation of shoulders held tense for too long. It's in the way breathing patterns shift from survival shallow to something approaching calm. It's in the silent acceptance of warmth offered without expectation of return. The shelter's heating unit cycles on, filling the space with a low hum. She doesn't startle at the sound, just turns her head slightly toward the source of warmth. Her markings brighten further, responding to the increased temperature. The coat still hangs loose around her, but she has wrapped it more securely, creating a cocoon of borrowed warmth. Then a subtle relief unfolds. Kel breaks a sustenance bar in half. The material fractures cleanly, revealing its pale, uniform interior. He offers her one portion while keeping the other for himself. She accepts it with both hands, her fingers careful not to touch his. The bar smells of processed nutrients and mineral supplements, the standard ration on Taros 9. She brings it to her mouth and takes a small bite, chewing slowly. "The taste is poor," she says after swallowing. Her voice remains neutral, stating a simple fact without judgment or complaint. The words hang in the air between them, accurate yet incomplete. The flavor may indeed be lacking, but the context transforms the experience. They sit across from each other on the shelter's floor, the heating unit warming their backs. This isn't just consumption. It's shared presence. Kel eats his portion more quickly out of long habit. He watches her take another careful bite. "I don't recall when I last shared sustenance with another," he says. The admission comes out quietly, almost lost in the hum of environmental systems. It isn't a complaint, just an observation about how life has been on this moon. The words acknowledge something fundamental that's been missing from both their existences. Her luminescent markings pulse gently as she processes this. The patterns shift from their resting state to something more complex. Geometries that suggest careful consideration. Her eyes meet his briefly, the fractal patterns in her irises contracting and expanding. She takes another bite of the bar, this time with slightly less hesitation. The act of eating together seems to create a small pocket of normalcy in the shelter's utilitarian space. The translator implant at her temple flickers with soft green light as she forms her next words. "My people only consume food in the presence of those we trust," she says. The statement carries weight beyond its simple declaration. It's both explanation and confession, an acknowledgement that this shared meal represents a significant step. Her trust isn't given lightly, especially after what she's endured. Kel finishes his portion and watches her eat the remainder of hers. The ritual feels strangely formal, this breaking of bread in a place where meals usually get taken standing up, alone, between shifts. The poor quality of the food becomes irrelevant next to the fact of sharing it. They're building something here, moment by moment, using whatever materials they have available. Her movements grow more relaxed as the meal continues. She doesn't rush through the last bites but savors them despite the bland flavor. The neural inhibitor collar continues its faint pulse at her throat, but its rhythm seems less insistent now, more background noise than active suppression. Her natural luminescence brightens in response to the warmth and companionship, the cerulean patterns flowing across her skin like slow water. This shared meal establishes a new pattern between them. It's not about survival anymore, not really. They've moved beyond mere sustenance into something more complex. The act of eating together creates a foundation for other shared activities, other moments of connection. They're learning each other's rhythms, preferences, the small tells that indicate mood or need. The empty wrapper gets folded neatly and set aside. Neither moves to stand immediately. They remain seated on the floor, the space between them charged with unspoken understanding. The meal has done its work, providing nutrition certainly, but more importantly, building trust through shared vulnerability. Two damaged beings have found common ground in the most basic of human rituals. What transforms a simple meal into something more? It's the context of mutual need, the recognition that survival alone isn't enough. The nutritional value gets amplified by the emotional exchange, by the simple fact of not eating alone. In a place designed to isolate and exploit, this shared sustenance becomes an act of quiet resistance. Finally, she speaks of her past. She sits with her back to the heating unit, the warm metal a steady presence against her spine. Her luminescent markings pulse gently as she gathers words. "We didn't possess designations as you understand them," she begins, her voice carrying a different quality now, less tentative. The translator implant at her temple glows softly as it processes concepts that don't translate cleanly. Her people existed as part of a continuum, not as separate individuals. They were echoes of those who came before, reflections carrying forward memory and experience. Identity wasn't something you owned, but something you participated in, a stream of consciousness flowing through generations. The slavers had tried to assign her a number, a designation, but the concept made no sense in her framework of being. You don't name an echo, you recognize its source. Her lineage came from the Meridian Expanse, a region the slavers only knew through rumors and fragmented records. They called her a sanctuary hybrid, a term that captured nothing of what that meant. Her biology wasn't designed for labor or servitude. It was shaped for resonance, for deep connection to environment and memory. The slavers tested her for strength, endurance, obedience, all the wrong metrics. They saw only what she couldn't do in their system, missing entirely what she could do in hers. She carries memories that aren't strictly her own. They flow through her like currents, ancient knowledge of environments and civilizations long gone. Her resonant sensitivity allows her to read patterns in stone, in air, in the subtle energies that move through all things. This ability made her useless for mining. She couldn't bear to break the patterns she could feel. But it made her invaluable for understanding, for preservation, for harmony. The neural inhibitor collar worked so effectively because it disrupted this connection. It isolated her from the resonance patterns that gave her context and purpose. Cut off from the flow of memory and environment, she became exactly what the slavers saw, a broken specimen unsuitable for their purposes. They never considered that her value might lie in connection rather than extraction, in understanding rather than domination. Kel listens without interruption. He understands now why she seemed so alien in the auction chamber. Her stillness wasn't submission, but deep attention. Her resistance to their tests wasn't defiance, but incompatibility with their worldview. They were trying to fit a key into a lock it wasn't made for. then declaring the key defective when it didn't turn. Her true purpose becomes clear in her description of the sanctuary lineages. They served as living libraries, repositories of environmental knowledge and cultural memory. Their value wasn't in what they could produce, but in what they preserved, what they understood. The slaver's economy had no category for this kind of worth. They could only measure output, not wisdom. Production, not preservation. This reframes everything about her presence here. She isn't a damaged asset needing repair, but a different kind of being entirely. One whose value exists outside Taros 9's brutal calculus. Kel's decision to purchase her shifts from an act of compassion to something more complex. An acknowledgement that some things can't be measured in credits or output. Some values exist beyond transaction. The ancient memories she carries aren't like human memories. They're more like sensory impressions, emotional echoes, patterns of knowledge that surface when needed. She speaks of mountains that remember their formation, of rivers that carry the memory of their sources, of atmospheres that hold the history of everything that's breathed them. Her people learn to read these patterns to become part of this conversation between past and present. What ancient knowledge does she carry? Not facts or dates, but deeper understandings. How to listen to stone, how to feel the health of an ecosystem through resonance patterns, how to maintain balance between living systems and their environments. These abilities were worthless to slavers, but priceless to civilizations that understood their importance. The Meridian Expanse apparently contained such civilizations, now lost to time and expansion. Instead, she chooses a new name. She speaks the name into the space between them. Now I am Lyria because you inquired. The words hang in the air, simple and declarative. She doesn't offer explanation or seek approval. The naming stands as its own justification. A fact stated without ceremony, yet heavy with meaning. This isn't the designation forced upon her by slavers or the absence of identity her people knew. It's something entirely new chosen in this moment for this context. Kel doesn't react immediately. He lets the name settle, understanding its weight. This act of self-naming represents more than just a convenient label. It's a declaration of autonomy after cycles of being classified, evaluated, and discarded. The slavers had given her a number. Her people had known her as part of a continuum. Now she claims an individual identity, separate from both systems of understanding. The moment carries cultural significance that transcends their current circumstances. For her people, naming wasn't a casual practice. It marked transitions, acknowledgments, sacred moments of becoming. By choosing her own name in his presence, she includes him in this ritual while maintaining control over its meaning. The shelter becomes temporary sacred ground, space for transformation rather than mere survival. This shift from captive to individual happens almost imperceptibly. One moment she's the broken specimen from the auction block, the next she's Lyria, a being with agency and choice. The change isn't in her physical appearance, but in how she occupies space, how she holds herself. Her luminescent markings brighten with the declaration, patterns shifting into configurations Kel hasn't seen before. They seem to celebrate this moment of self-definition. Kel's simple question about her previous designation created the space for this transformation. By asking rather than assigning, by showing curiosity rather than authority, he offered her the opportunity to define herself. His respect for her autonomy made this moment possible. The transaction at the auction house established legal ownership, but this moment establishes something entirely different, recognition of personhood. The name Lyria symbolizes her rebirth in the safety of this shelter. It represents not just who she is now, but who she's choosing to become. The syllables carry the echo of her people's language while creating something new, something that belongs specifically to this relationship and this time. It's a name forged in the space between trauma and safety, between captivity and tentative freedom. Their relationship shifts fundamentally with this naming. They're no longer rescuer and rescued, owner and property. The act of self-definition creates the first real foundation for partnership. Kel understands that he's witnessing something significant, something that changes the nature of their connection. He accepts the name with a simple nod, acknowledging its importance without making it into something grander than it is. This act of creation matters precisely because of what came before. After being treated as disposable, as unsuitable, as worthless, claiming a name becomes revolutionary. It's a quiet protest against the system that tried to erase her identity. The act says, I am here, I exist, and I will define what that means. The simplicity of the statement underscores its power. What makes this introduction a turning point? It's the moment when their relationship moves beyond transaction into mutual recognition. Kel didn't just purchase a slave, he provided the conditions for a person to emerge. Lyria didn't just accept rescue. She claimed her place as an equal participant in whatever comes next. The naming ceremony, brief as it was, established new terms for their coexistence. The neural inhibitor collar continues its faint pulse at her throat, but it seems less significant now. The external marker of control remains, but internally, something has shifted. She's no longer the person that device was designed to suppress. She's someone new. Someone who has named herself despite the constraints. The collar becomes just hardware, while she becomes Lyria. Then they turn to art. Kel brings out a block of raw stone from the mining tunnels. The material feels cold and unforgiving in his hands, veined with metallic deposits unique to this moon. His initial attempts at shaping it produce awkward angles and rough surfaces. The stone resists his tools, chips flying in unpredictable patterns. Each failed stroke speaks of frustration, of guilt looking for physical expression. He's trying to carve something meaningful from material that seems determined to remain stubbornly inert. Lyria watches his efforts without comment at first. Her luminescent markings pulse softly, responding to the resonance of stone meeting metal. She approaches the workbench slowly, her hands held palms down as if feeling the material's vibrations through the air. Her sensitivity to the stone's internal structure makes Kel's brute force approach seem clumsy by comparison. She doesn't touch the stone itself, just observes how it reacts to each impact, how its internal stresses shift with every strike. They begin working with clay instead, finding a deposit near the heating vents where moisture collects. The material gives under pressure but holds its form, allowing for slower, more deliberate shaping. Kel's hands, accustomed to handling tools and weapons, learn new movements. Lyria's fingers work with innate understanding of how pressure affects structure. The clay becomes their medium for negotiating unspoken things. Grief, memory, the weight of what they've both survived. She watches Kel struggle with a particularly stubborn section. His frustration shows in the tight set of his shoulders, the force behind each movement. "Your work is not flawed," she says quietly, "merely incomplete." The reframing changes how he sees the material. Instead of fighting against imperfections, he begins working with them, following the natural lines and fractures. The focus shifts from achieving a perfect form to discovering what wants to emerge from the raw material. This shared creative process offers them something therapy might provide in another context, a way to communicate without words, to process trauma through action rather than conversation. They're not creating art for exhibition or praise. They're building a language of hands and materials, learning to see potential where they once saw only damage. The act of creation becomes its own validation, separate from any external measure of worth. Their hands connect more than once during the work. Neither withdraws immediately. The physical contact becomes part of the process, a silent dialogue of trust being built through shared effort. Kel learns to read the slight changes in Lyria's luminescent patterns that signal concentration or satisfaction. She learns to anticipate when he needs space to work through a difficult section alone. The stone they eventually return to seems different now. Kel approaches it with more patience, less need to force it into submission. Lyria places her hands on its surface, feeling the internal structures through her fingertips. Her markings brighten as she connects with the material's natural resonance. They work together now, Kel with his tools, Lyria guiding with her sensitivity to the stone's hidden patterns. What makes this their pathway to healing? It's the nonverbal communication, the shared focus on creating rather than destroying. In a place designed for extraction and consumption, they engage in an act of addition instead. They're not fixing each other's brokenness but building something new from whatever materials they have. The process values patience over speed, understanding over domination, emergence over imposition. The art becomes their meeting ground, a space where their different backgrounds and traumas can find expression without requiring explanation. Kel's military precision learns to coexist with Lyria's resonant sensitivity. The materials themselves become teachers, showing them how to work with rather than against, how to find the form hidden within rather than imposing one from without. Their collaboration transforms the shelter from a place of mere survival to a studio of sorts. The workbench becomes central to their daily routine, the materials arranged with care instead of utility. They're building more than sculptures. They're building a shared language, a way of being together that honors both their differences and their common ground. The act of creation becomes an antidote to the moon's relentless destruction. Finally, a fracture occurs. The stone fractures with a sharp crack that echoes in the small shelter. Sparks fly from where Lyria's tool struck wrong, the sound final and absolute. A jagged line zigzags across the surface, disrupting the form that had been emerging. She freezes, her hand still holding the tool that caused the damage. Every luminescent pattern on her skin darkens simultaneously as if responding to internal shock. The vibrant cerulean glow fades to near invisibility, leaving her looking strangely pale despite her natural skin tone. Her shoulders slump forward. The tool drops from her fingers, clattering against the workbench. She stares at the fractured stone, her breathing shallow. "I cannot perform this function," she whispers, the words barely audible over the hum of environmental systems. "I perceive nothing. I experience nothing. It's all vacant." The admission carries more than personal failure. It speaks of cultural extinction, the severing of an ancient tradition that defined her people. Kel recognizes this moment. The paralysis that follows perceived failure. He remembers his own experience after a catastrophic mission, trying to create something beautiful from broken pieces and watching it shatter under his hands. He'd swept the tools away then, sealed them in a container as if they were dangerous rather than innocent extensions of his damaged intent. That memory gives him understanding now, not solutions. He doesn't move to fix the stone or offer empty reassurance. He simply maintains his position, watching her without judgment. His silence isn't absence but presence, a solid thing in the space between them. The bond they've built has evolved beyond rescue into something more complex. They provide mutual shelter now, each offering what the other needs without transaction or expectation. Lyria's hands remain motionless on the workbench. The neural inhibitor collar pulses faintly at her throat, its rhythm unchanged by her distress. She seems smaller somehow, diminished by this setback. The fracture in the stone mirrors something inside her, a break in the tentative confidence she'd been building. Her people valued creation as an act of harmony, and this failure feels like dissonance. Kel approaches slowly, not touching the stone or her. He studies the fracture line, following its path across the surface. The break reveals interior structures that would have remained hidden, crystalline formations that catch the light differently than the exterior stone. The damage has created new planes, new angles, new possibilities. He sees not ruin but transformation. "I experience this same vacancy sometimes," he says quietly. "The tools feel wrong in my hands. The material fights me." He doesn't look at her as he speaks, keeping his attention on the stone. Creation doesn't come from tranquility. It comes from anguish, from memory, from choosing to shape it regardless. The words hang between them, an offering rather than instruction. Lyria's luminescent patterns begin to brighten slightly, responding to his understanding. She reaches out slowly, her fingers tracing the fracture line. The contact seems to calm her, the physical connection with the damaged stone providing anchor points. Her breathing deepens, the shallow panic replaced by something more measured. They choose to see the fracture not as an end, but as a new axis. The break becomes part of the piece rather than its destruction. Kel picks up another tool, testing its weight. Lyria's hand moves to join his, not taking the tool but guiding its placement. Their movements synchronize, each following the other's lead. The fracture becomes a line, the line becomes a curve, the curve becomes something new. What does the broken stone reveal? That their relationship isn't about fixing each other's brokenness, but about building something new from it. The fracture becomes part of the design, integrated rather than hidden. It represents understanding born from shared struggle, partnership forged in mutual vulnerability. They're learning that breaking doesn't always mean destroyed. Sometimes it means opened up, revealed, made ready for new possibilities. The illumination from the heating element catches the newly exposed crystalline surfaces, creating prismatic reflections across their workspace. The damage has revealed beauty that would have remained hidden. Lyria's patterns brighten further, aligning with the emerging form as if her biology recognizes and celebrates this transformation. The points of contact between them feel natural now, necessary components of the creative process they share. Instead, They resolve to shape it together. Lyria picks up the resonance hammer. The tool feels wrong in her hands, its weight unbalanced for her frame. She adjusts her grip, fingers finding positions that allow better control. Her luminescent markings shift to complex patterns, the light intensifying along her arms and neck. She doesn't swing the hammer with force but brings it down in a controlled arc, not striking the stone so much as letting it kiss the surface. The contact creates not a crack but a hum that lingers in the air. The vibration spreads through the workbench into the floor, through the shelter walls. Small mineral deposits in the stone begin to glow with stored energy. The air itself seems to thicken, charged with something beyond normal atmosphere. Kel watches the environment respond to her presence rather than her actions. The stone doesn't break, it answers. The walls don't shake, they resonate. The air doesn't move, it harmonizes. She brings the hammer down again, same controlled motion. This time the effect amplifies. Crystalline structures within the stone illuminate from within, their light patterns matching the rhythms of her markings. The shelter's metal framework emits a low thrumming sound, not threatening but acknowledging. Everything in their immediate environment enters into conversation with her focused will. The power displays not as destruction, but as deep disciplined connection. Kel observes without moving. He sees how the environment responds to her intention rather than force. "You didn't cause injury," he says quietly. "You warned. The distinction matters." She hasn't used this ability to dominate or destroy, only to demonstrate connection. The display serves as communication, not threat. Her power operates on principles completely foreign to Taros 9's extractive economy. Her hands tremble slightly as she sets the hammer down. The luminescent patterns on her skin dim momentarily. "I experienced fear," she confesses. The admission carries weight. This power isn't something she wields lightly. It comes with responsibility, with understanding of its potential impact. The fear isn't of the power itself, but of its misuse, of becoming what others expected her to be, a weapon instead of a guardian. This revelation shifts everything about how Kel understands her value. Her abilities weren't useless to the slavers because they were weak, but because they required conditions the slavers couldn't provide. Peace instead of force, harmony instead of domination, stewardship instead of exploitation. They tested her for what she could take from the environment, never considering what she could give back to it. Her true capability lies in resonant sensitivity tuned to extreme levels. She doesn't manipulate matter so much as communicate with it, finding harmonies that allow cooperative response rather than forced obedience. The stone illuminates because it chooses to answer her call, not because she commands it. The air crystallizes with resonance because it recognizes a kindred frequency. This is power as conversation, not monologue. The slavers never discovered this because they operated through force and control. They put the neural inhibitor collar on her before she could demonstrate what she could really do. They saw only what she couldn't do for them: break rock, follow orders, serve without question. They missed that her abilities required partnership with environment, not domination over it. What powerful capability has she been hiding? Not destruction, but deep listening. Not force, but invitation. Her people evolved to work with their environments through resonant connection. This made them invaluable caretakers and terrible laborers. The slavers wanted to extract value, while her abilities revolve around mutual enhancement. They needed miners, and she could only be a guardian. The resonance gradually fades from the environment. The stone's internal light dims, the air clears. The shelter's framework falls silent. Only her markings continue their soft glow, patterns shifting to something more peaceful now that the demonstration concludes. She looks at Kel not with triumph but with solemn understanding. This power carries weight, and she's just beginning to comprehend its full implications. Then a threat arrives. 3 figures fill the shelter doorway. The leader's scarred face shows no expression as his eyes scan the interior. His armor bears the marks of countless encounters, but his posture speaks of efficiency rather than aggression. Behind him, a broad-shouldered enforcer carries restraint gear, while a tech specialist adjusts a handheld scanner that hums with activation. They don't ask for entry. They simply occupy the space, their presence violating the sanctuary Kel and Lyria have built. The leader's gaze passes over Kel without interest, fixing on Lyria. He sees not a person but recovered property. The scanner in the tech's hand begins emitting soft pulses of light as it assesses biological readings. They represent the cold economy of Taros 9 returning to claim what it considers its due. Their tools aren't designed for negotiation, but for dispossession, for returning assets to productive service. The shelter's warmth suddenly feels fragile against their professional indifference. Kel steps forward, placing his body between the extractors and Lyria. The movement isn't aggressive, but definitive. He doesn't reach for a weapon or adopt a combat stance. He simply becomes a barrier. The extractors notice the shift immediately. Their professional detachment gives way to focused attention. The leader's hand moves slightly toward the neural disruptor at his hip, a motion so practiced it seems unconscious. The confrontation unfolds in silence for a moment. The extractors see a disgraced creator protecting damaged merchandise. Kel sees sentient beings facing institutionalized predation. The ideological divide between them becomes physical space in the shelter. The leader finally speaks, his voice flat and uninflected. You exercise poor judgment. You should have surrendered her when opportunity existed. The words carry the weight of system policy, of cost-benefit analyses that leave no room for individual rights. Kel doesn't respond to the accusation. His attention remains divided between the three figures, assessing threats and options. The scanner continues its soft humming, now focused specifically on Lyria's neural readings. The tech murmurs about resonance levels that don't match previous profiles. Their interest sharpens at this discrepancy. An anomaly might mean increased value or increased risk. The leader's eyes narrow as he takes in the details he initially missed. The absence of restraint gear, the shared workspace, the way Lyria stands behind Kel not as property but as partner. His professional contempt shows in the twist of his mouth. You genuinely believe I fear a damaged sanctuary remnant and a disgraced creator? The question isn't really a question. It's a statement of institutional power asserting itself. Kel meets the man's gaze steadily. She isn't your property, he says, his voice low but clear. The transaction completed. The registry updated. Now she's a sentient being under my protection. The words hang in the air, a direct challenge to their entire system of valuation. He's not arguing legality or ownership. He's stating a fundamental truth that their economy doesn't recognize. The standoff hardens with this declaration. The extractors shift from reclamation mode to threat response. The enforcer's hands tighten on the restraint gear. The tech adjusts the scanner for more invasive readings. The leader's fingers now rest openly on the neural disruptor. They've moved from retrieving lost property to dealing with resistance. The stakes have escalated beyond simple repossession. What choice does a man make when faced with the machine that created him? Kel understands these people, their training, their priorities. He's operated by similar rules himself. That familiarity gives him advantage even as it reveals his vulnerability. He knows they won't leave without what they came for, and he knows he can't let them take her. The resolution forms not as a decision, but as acceptance of inevitable collision. Lyria remains still behind him, but her luminescent markings have shifted to patterns Kel hasn't seen before. The light intensifies, casting cerulean reflections on the shelter walls. The scanner suddenly emits a sharp warning tone, its readings spiking beyond normal parameters. The tech looks up, confusion replacing professional detachment. Something is happening that their equipment doesn't understand. Finally, Lyria acts. Lyria doesn't raise her hands or adopt a defensive stance. She simply breathes differently. The air in the shelter changes first. Moisture condenses into visible crystals that hang suspended, catching the dim light in prismatic patterns. The temperature drops sharply, frost forming on metal surfaces. The extractor's scanner emits a high-pitched whine as its readings go off scale. They look around, confusion replacing professional certainty. This isn't combat as they understand it. The ridge above the shelter groans. The sound comes from deep within the rock, a vibration that travels through the foundations and up through the floor plates. Loose mineral deposits shift in the tunnels outside, creating a rustling cascade that grows louder. The extractors look toward the ceiling, their hands moving to weapons they suddenly realize might be useless. They're trained for confrontation with living opponents, not with the environment itself. Lyria's luminescent markings blaze with intensity, patterns flowing across her skin too rapidly to follow. The neural inhibitor collar at her throat flickers erratically, its control systems overwhelmed by the energy she's channeling. She doesn't look at the extractors. Her attention remains focused on the space around them, on the connections between air and stone and energy. This isn't an attack. It's a demonstration, a warning written in the language of the mountain itself. Rock dust sifts down from the ceiling as the groaning intensifies. The sound carries emotion in its vibrations, not anger, but something deeper and more ancient. The extractor's leader backs toward the doorway, his professional detachment shattered. His weapon remains holstered because there's nothing to shoot at. How do you fight a mountain that has decided to grieve? How do you threaten air that has chosen to crystallize? This power comes from her people's deepest cultural memories. They understood that true strength lies in harmony with environment, not domination over it. The ability to make a mountain grieve represents not destruction, but profound connection. It's the environment itself responding to threat, answering her call for protection. The extractor's tools of force and control become meaningless against such resonance. Their scanners can measure biological functions but can't comprehend ecological relationships. The air pressure changes suddenly, making their ears pop. The suspended ice crystals begin to vibrate, creating a harmonic resonance that sets teeth on edge. The extractor's equipment malfunctions completely, screens going dark as systems overload. The broad-shouldered enforcer drops his restraint gear, the clatter loud in the unnatural silence between the mountain's groans. They're facing something outside all their training and experience. Lyria doesn't move toward them. She simply maintains the connection, her breathing steady despite the energy she's channeling. The demonstration serves as both warning and education. It shows what true power looks like when it operates through understanding rather than force. The extractors see now why she was considered unsuitable for labor. Her abilities require partnership, not subjugation. They were trying to use a symphony conductor as a hammer. The leader raises his hands slowly, a gesture of surrender rather than aggression. His eyes remain fixed on Lyria, finally seeing her not as property but as something entirely beyond his understanding. The mountain's groaning subsides gradually, the vibration fading from the floor plates. The ice crystals lose their coherence, falling to dust that vanishes before touching surfaces. The air pressure normalizes, though the temperature remains cool. They retreat without another word. The leader backs through the doorway first, his men following quickly. They don't look back as they disappear down the corridor, their professional confidence shattered. The confrontation ended not with violence but with understanding, their understanding that some forces can't be controlled or commodified. Some things exist outside the economy of extraction. The shelter falls silent except for the hum of environmental systems returning to normal operation. Frost begins to melt on metal surfaces, leaving damp trails. Lyria's luminescent patterns dim to their resting state, the brilliant light fading to soft cerulean glow. She sways slightly, the energy expenditure leaving her weakened. The neural inhibitor collar at her throat has gone completely dark, its mechanisms finally overloaded beyond recovery. How does making a mountain respond save them? It demonstrates that true protection comes from harmony with environment, rather than force against opposition. The extractors understood weapons and threats and ownership. They had no framework for understanding a power that worked through connection rather than domination. Faced with something their tools couldn't measure or control, they had no choice but to withdraw. The mountain itself became their protector, answering Lyria's call not with violence but with presence. Instead, they retreat. Lyria's knees give first. She catches herself on the workbench, breathing ragged. The energy required to resonate with the mountain drains her completely. Her luminescent markings flicker weakly, their usual cerulean brilliance reduced to faint traceries. Kel moves quickly, guiding her to the floor before she falls. The triumph of their defense fades against this immediate physical cost. They won the confrontation, but the victory extracts payment in diminished reserves. Her hands tremble as she tries to steady herself. Kel brings water, supporting the cup while she drinks. He sees the true toll now, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her skin looks almost translucent with exhaustion. The neural inhibitor collar remains dark at her throat, its systems finally silent after her overwhelming display. That silence comes at a price. Her energy reserves, already depleted from captivity, now hover near critical levels. Kel checks their environmental readings without her seeing the display. The numbers tell a stark story. Power reserves down 20% from the strain of her resonance. Heating element operating at minimum efficiency. Oxygen recycling struggling with the atmospheric changes she created. He makes a quick decision, adjusting controls to mask the true readings. The display now shows stable numbers, hiding their precarious situation. She needs to believe they're safe now. that the threat has passed completely. The truth could wait until she recovers. The heating unit cycles on, its hum sounding strained to his trained ear. He positions her closer to its warmth, draping his coat around her shoulders again. This simple lifeline against the moon's relentless cold feels fragile now. He knows how quickly systems fail here. How a 20% drop in reserves can become critical in just a few cycles. But he also knows she needs the psychological safety of warmth almost as much as the physical protection it provides. Inside the shelter, something fundamental has shifted. Their shared defense against the extractors created a new understanding between them. When Kel's hand brushes hers while adjusting the heating controls, neither pulls away. The contact feels different now, not accidental but intentional. Shared warmth becomes their answer to the cold indifference outside these walls. The space transforms from mere refuge into something more intimate, a place where two damaged beings are becoming something new together. Her breathing gradually steadies. The terrible trembling in her hands subsides. She leans into the warmth of his coat, her head resting against the wall behind her. Her luminescent patterns remain dim but no longer flickering. The crisis has passed, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Kel remains nearby, not hovering but present, ready to respond if she needs anything. Their communication needs no words now. The simple fact of shared presence says everything required. This mutual shelter they've created feels more solid after facing external threat together. The extractors represented everything this moon values: extraction, control, disposable lives. Their united front against that philosophy forged a bond that goes beyond protector and protected. They've become partners in the truest sense, each offering what the other needs without keeping score. The shelter's walls no longer mark a boundary between them and the world, but a space where something new can grow. How does defending their home change them? It transforms their relationship from tentative alliance to undeniable partnership. They've seen each other at their most vulnerable and most powerful. Kel witnessed Lyria's incredible abilities and their devastating cost. Lyria saw Kel's willingness to stand against his own kind for her safety. This shared struggle removes the last barriers between them, creating trust that goes deeper than words or transactions. They're no longer two individuals surviving separately in the same space, but a united front against whatever comes next. The stone they'd been working on before the interruption sits on the workbench, the fracture line still visible across its surface. It waits for them, a project interrupted by necessity but not abandoned. The crisis has changed how they'll approach it, just as it's changed how they approach each other. The fracture no longer represents failure but persistence, the determination to keep creating despite interruptions, despite threats, despite dwindling resources. Then, they return to the stone. The fractured stone now stands upright on their work surface. What began as a broken block has become something new. Its surface is transformed by their shared efforts. Light from the heating element catches the exposed crystalline structures within, creating prismatic patterns that dance across the workspace. The central fracture runs through the piece like a lightning strike frozen in mineral, but it no longer looks like damage. It has become part of the design, an integral feature rather than a flaw waiting to be hidden. They stand together before the piece, not speaking. Kel's hands bear the small cuts and abrasions from working the stone. Lyria's luminescent markings pulse gently in rhythm with her breathing, their light reflecting off the polished surfaces. The sculpture represents hours of patient labor, moments of frustration overcome and silent understanding between them. It holds their shared history in its form, the memory of its breaking and remaking encoded in every curve and plane. This creation could not have happened through individual effort alone. Kel brought the technical skill, the understanding of tools and materials. Lyria brought her resonant sensitivity, her ability to feel the stone's internal structure and work with its natural grain. The fusion of their approaches produced something neither could have achieved separately. The piece balances strength and delicacy, precision and intuition, human craftsmanship and something older and more subtle. The fracture itself has been emphasized rather than concealed. They've polished the broken edges until they catch the light, making the damage line gleam like a vein of precious metal. This choice reflects their shared understanding that brokenness doesn't have to mean ruin. Sometimes it creates new possibilities, new ways of seeing and being. The piece celebrates resilience rather than pretending it never suffered damage at all. Their art has evolved beyond mere healing. Initially, working with stone and clay served as therapy, a way to process trauma through physical creation. Now it has become about building something positive, rather than just repairing something broken. They're not covering scars but integrating them into new growth. The focus has shifted from what was lost to what can be gained, from survival to creation. This sculpture represents their answer to everything Taros 9 represents. The moon values extraction, consumption, disposable usefulness. They've created something that embodies the opposite: care, preservation, the beauty of imperfection. It stands as quiet resistance against the cold economy that surrounds them, proof that some things can't be measured in output or efficiency. Some values exist outside transaction. The piece holds their shared future within its form. It's not finished yet. They both sense it has more to become, but what exists already tells a complete story. It speaks of partnership forged through adversity, of trust built moment by moment, of two damaged beings finding strength in combination rather than isolation. The sculpture will continue evolving as they do, a living document of their journey together. What does this transformed stone reveal about love born from shared trauma? That it doesn't pretend the damage never happened. It acknowledges the fractures and integrates them into something stronger. Real connection comes not from perfect compatibility, but from willing to work with each other's broken places. Their sculpture demonstrates that beauty can emerge from damage when approached with patience, respect, and shared purpose. The fracture line has become the most beautiful part, the place where light catches best. They've created something that defies the moon's harsh logic. In a place that measures worth by utility, they've made something with no practical purpose beyond being itself. In an environment that discards anything imperfect, they've celebrated imperfection. In a system that isolates individuals, they've built partnership into physical form. The sculpture stands as their joint declaration that some values transcend survival. Finally, they rest. Lyria dreams. Her breathing slows to a deep, rhythmic pattern that matches the faint hum of the shelter's heating unit. The luminescent patterns beneath her skin flow in gentle rhythms, expressing her true nature without constraint. This isn't the restless sleep of captivity or exhaustion, but the profound rest of someone who finally feels safe. Her resonance, once suppressed by the neural inhibitor, now directs itself toward beauty and meaning rather than survival or defense. The dreams themselves remain private, but their effect shows in the peaceful set of her features, the complete relaxation of her hands resting palms up on the bedding. Outside their shelter, the universe continues its indifferent patterns. The mining operations run through the night cycle, their machinery grinding through rock with mechanical persistence. The cold wind sweeps across the moon's surface, carrying fine particles of mineral dust that scratch at any exposed surface. The extractive economy never sleeps, never questions, never imagines anything beyond production and consumption. This reality remains unchanged, its harsh logic continuing just beyond their thin walls. But within their shelter, something new has taken root. The shared meals, the collaborative artwork, the silent understanding, these have created a different reality. They've built a microcosm where different values apply, where warmth matters more than efficiency, where connection outweighs production. This space functions as their personal sanctuary against the moon's pervasive indifference. The heating unit's steady hum provides more than physical warmth. It represents their shared commitment to creating a different kind of existence. They've moved beyond the categories the moon understands. Master and servant, owner and property, these distinctions hold no meaning here. They've become partners through shared struggle, through choosing trust when fear would have been easier. Kel watches her sleep, noting how her luminescent patterns continue their gentle dance even in rest. He recognizes this as the physical manifestation of her true self emerging, no longer constrained by captivity or survival anxiety. Presence has become their radical act of resistance. In a place that values people for what they can produce, they've chosen to value each other simply for being. The shared warmth of the shelter defies the cold logic outside. Their simple act of existing together, of creating a space where both can be vulnerable, represents a quiet revolution against Taros 9's values. They've discovered that sometimes the most powerful rebellion is choosing connection over transaction. Two damaged souls have found something neither expected to encounter on this mining moon. The ice and wind continue their relentless work outside, but inside they've built a pocket of warmth and understanding. Their individual brokenness hasn't vanished, but it's become part of what connects them rather than what isolates them. They've learned that healing doesn't mean erasing damage, but integrating it into something new. Their future remains uncertain. The moon's systems continue their operations. Their resources continue to diminish and external threats may return. But whatever comes next, they'll face it together. They've moved from surviving individually to building something shared. The partnership they've forged gives them strength to imagine possibilities beyond mere survival, to consider a future that isn't just about enduring, but about living. Hope emerges from this shared vulnerability. They've seen each other at their most broken and most powerful, and neither turned away. This mutual acceptance creates a foundation strong enough to support dreams of a gentler world. Their shelter has become more than protection against the elements. It's become the physical space where new possibilities can take form, where two people can imagine a different way of being together. How do damaged beings find strength to imagine something better? They start by creating a space where imagination becomes possible. They build trust through shared meals and collaborative work. They learn to see brokenness not as permanent damage, but as potential for new growth. Most importantly, they discover that some values can't be measured in output or efficiency. That warmth, trust, and shared vulnerability have worth that exists outside any economic system. Then, the video concludes, Kel Renaer purchased protection for his own soul that day. He didn't rescue Lyria from Taros 9's decay. He rescued himself from its moral corrosion. Their story shows that redemption isn't found in dramatic gestures, but in the quiet, consistent choice to safeguard another being. Even in the universe's darkest corners where life holds no sacred value, a single act of compassion can reshape existence. Kel's decision to protect someone deemed worthless became his path from survival toward meaning, proving that guardianship renews the protector as much as the protected. The neural inhibitor collar remains locked around her throat, a cold band of polished metal against her skin. Its blue light pulses in a steady rhythm, each cycle syncing with her breathing. Kel watches the pattern, recognizing the technology from his military days. He's seen similar devices used on captured enemy operatives, designed to suppress psionic abilities or neural enhancements. This model appears more sophisticated, its programming woven into the wearer's basic biological functions. The collar doesn't just restrain movement, it operates on a deeper level, creating a feedback loop that neutralizes her resonant sensitivity. Kel observes how its pulses correspond to subtle changes in her luminescent markings. When the collar brightens, her natural glow dims in response. The technology establishes dominance over her biology, forcing her systems to conform to its rhythm rather than their natural state. It's a cage constructed not from bars but from controlled frequencies. He understands why the slavers considered her useless. The collar's programming actively works against the very abilities that might have made her valuable. Her resonant sensitivity gets turned inward, trapped in a closed loop that prevents external manifestation. What could have been a tool for mining or environmental analysis becomes an internal burden, a capability that drains energy without producing measurable results. The device makes her ordinary by suppressing the extraordinary. Kel studies the locking mechanism without touching it. The collar interfaces directly with her nervous system through microfilaments that penetrate the skin. Removal wouldn't be a simple matter of cutting through metal. The filaments would need careful extraction to avoid damaging neural pathways. He's seen what happens when these devices get removed improperly. Permanent neurological damage, sometimes death. The risk increases the longer the collar remains active. As she grows more comfortable in the shelter, the collar's influence weakens. Its pulses become less regular, sometimes skipping a beat when she breathes deeply or focuses on something in her environment. Her natural luminescence grows stronger during these moments, the cerulean patterns on her skin brightening despite the collar's attempts to suppress them. It's as if her biology is slowly overcoming the artificial constraints. The collar represents everything Taros 9 values: control, predictability, measurable output. It turns a living being into a manageable asset, removing variables that can't be quantified or controlled. Kel recognizes the philosophy behind its design because he's lived by similar principles for too long. The moon's entire economy operates on this same logic, valuing only what can be counted and controlled. He makes a deliberate choice not to attempt removal. The risk remains too high without proper equipment and medical knowledge. More importantly, he understands that true freedom won't come from simply removing the hardware. The collar's real power lies in the psychological conditioning it represents, the internalized limitation that tells its wearer what they cannot do. Physical removal might address the symptom, but not the deeper wound. Kel watches her gradually overcome the device's influence through sheer will. Her markings grow brighter each cycle, the patterns more complex and vivid. The collar continues its pulsed rhythm, but the synchronization grows less perfect with each passing hour. Small gaps appear between the artificial signal and her biological responses. She's learning to exist alongside the suppression, finding ways to express her nature despite the constraints. The liberation happens gradually, in small victories, a moment when her glow brightens despite the collar's pulse, an instance where she turns her head toward a sound the device should have masked. These subtle rebellions against the technology's programming mark the beginning of real autonomy. She's not waiting for someone to remove her chains. She's learning to carry them differently. Instead, he does not remove it. Her markings begin to speak. Kel notices the patterns first, subtle shifts in the cerulean light that plays across her skin. When she feels uncertain or afraid, the luminescence dims, pulling back into faint traceries that barely register in the shelter's low light. When curiosity takes hold, the patterns shift into complex geometries that seem to fold and unfold across her arms and neck. These aren't random biological displays. They're a language of emotion written in light. He learns to read her state without words. A particular spiral pattern appears when she's concentrating. A softer wave-like motion signals relaxation. The markings respond to environmental factors too. They brighten when she's near the heating unit, their blue deepening to richer tones. Kel starts anticipating her needs based on these visual cues. When the patterns dim, he checks the shelter's temperature or offers water. When they shift into tight angular formations, he gives her space. The neural inhibitor's influence weakens further as her comfort grows. Its blue pulse now fights against her natural luminescence rather than controlling it. Her skin responds to touch as well. When Kel's hand brushes against her arm while passing something, the contact point glows brighter for a moment, before returning to its baseline state. This isn't a reflex. It's acknowledgement, a biological response to connection. Her markings hint at an origin far from this mining moon. The patterns suggest adaptation to environments where light carries information, where visual communication might have been more effective than sound. The complexity of the shifting geometry speaks of a civilization that valued subtlety and nuance, not the brute efficiency that defines Taros 9. These aren't decorative features. They're the remnants of a different way of being. Kel observes how the light responds to trust. When she accepts food from his hand without hesitation, the patterns soften into gentle ripples. When she initiates contact, reaching for a tool he's holding, the markings brighten noticeably. This visual language becomes their primary means of communication in these early days. Words remain limited, but the light speaks volumes about her internal state. The biological mechanism remains a mystery, but its purpose becomes clear. This luminescence serves as both protection and communication. In fear, dimming makes her less visible. In safety, brightness might signal well-being to others of her kind. The markings also respond to emotional states she can't yet articulate. The complex interplay of trauma and emerging trust, of memory and present moment awareness. As days pass, the patterns grow more vibrant and complex. They begin to incorporate subtle color variations, hints of violet and silver mixed with the predominant blue. The light seems to come from deep within her skin, not just from the surface. When she sleeps, the markings continue their gentle pulse, though slower and more rhythmic, like a heartbeat made visible. Kel realizes the light serves as a barometer of her returning life force. The slavers saw only a broken specimen because they kept her in conditions that suppressed her natural biology. In an environment of warmth and safety, her body begins to function as it was meant to. The increasing brilliance of her markings correlates directly with her physical and emotional improvement. What makes her glow when she feels safe? It's not a conscious choice. It's biological truth revealing itself. Her people evidently evolved to express internal states through external light. In captivity, this ability became a liability. In freedom, it becomes a language. The light signals that her systems are returning to their natural equilibrium, that she's moving from survival mode toward something resembling wholeness. The patterns have become so familiar that Kel can now anticipate her moods before she moves. He knows when she's troubled by the way the light contracts toward her center, He recognizes contemplation in the slow, deliberate shifts of geometric patterns across her forehead and hands. This unspoken communication has become more reliable than any words they might exchange. Then, they share a meal.